going on, Dragon Ball fans? Welcome back to another Dragon Ball fan manga breakdown review, where today we're going to be reviewing a fan manga entitled Dragon Ball Multiverse, which is a fan-made manga set within its own timeline outside of the main canon of Akira Toriyama and Toei Animation, involving both characters from Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, as the overall concept of Dragon Ball Multiverse involves universes from all timelines and dimensions to gather together and battle in one tournament in order to determine which one of the many participating universes competing in this tournament will be the first to obtain the prize of the Dragon Balls for their own personal usage, as for many years now I've been reviewing and introducing all kinds of Dragon Ball fan mangas to the world created by the community for the community. So if you guys are interested in seeing and reading up on incredible stories and concepts such as Dragon Ball AF, Dragon Ball Legendary, Dragon Ball New Age, Dragon Ball X, and many others, then feel free to check out the Dragon Ball fan manga playlist in the description box for more videos such as this, as right now we are going to be diving into a brand new manga chapter. As before we begin, if you are new to this channel, hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications to be the first to know when a new video is posted onto this channel, as we kick off the Dragon Ball Multiverse manga chapter number 29 special in Universe 3 within the year of 780. Now we get to see this massive castle in the background as an individual begins to walk on in with a voice crying out to him and asking, "What are you doing here?" In which the individual who happened to walk on in by the name of Hoi replies back by saying, "The door was open, I mean, there was no door," as the individual who has his back turned towards Hoi replies by saying, "There is no life on this planet, I need no door," as he turns around with Hoi having to reply and saying, "Dr. Rachi, did you hear about the great hero Tapion? He is a prisoner of an evil music box sealed by powerful black magic," as Rachi turns around and saying, "I don't care about your hero," but then that's when Hoi says, "Only you have the powers to open it, believe me, I've tried every other way," with Rachi having to say, "Just go away, now," implying that he doesn't even want to know about Tapion to begin with, and that's when Hoi pulls out a box from his jacket and saying, "Dr. Raichi, you are a true hero because you've destroyed the Saiyan people who are oppressing the universe, and Tapion too is a hero, he deserves to be freed." And I found this to be most interesting, especially having to play off the plan to eradicate the Saiyans movie, as it goes on to state Raichi worked several days on a way to open the mysterious box because he agreed that he was going to help allow Tapion to be freed, and that's when the narration goes on to state this new challenge was refreshing for him, as we see the doctor trying to do everything he can by playing music and trying to open up the box, and that's when all of a sudden we see the box begin to click, we see the box begin to shake, in which all of a sudden we see a mist come about, and from this mist we see how all of a sudden Tapion emerges, in which goes on to state a powerful energy is trying to escape, in which right then and there in the flesh before the doctor and Hoi, Tapion is freed, as Tapion glares at both of them and saying, "Why did you free me?" As Hoi goes on to state, "Aren't you happy to be out of your prison?" And Tapion replies very aggressively by saying, "You shouldn't have done this," as the doctor replies by saying, "What's the problem, boy?" As right then and there we see Hoi grin as he begins to take off in trying to escape them, with all of a sudden we see how the door shuts behind him in saying, "So there was a door," as Raichi goes on to state, "You're not getting away, explain yourself now," in which Hoi turns around and saying, "Well, no need to be hasty, you'll understand it all by yourself." All of a sudden we see how Hoi begins to emit some sort of a gas, some sort of like a mist from his body, and Tapion knows and saying, This is not good," as Tapion goes on to state it's the bottom of Hirudegarn, which was a trap the entire time in allowing Tapion to be freed so Hirudegarn could return. And all of a sudden we see how the doctor goes on to state a massive power here in the lab? How? And as Tapion begins to play the flute, we see Hirudegarn's tail just ripping right through the entire city, in which we see the bottom half of him, and it's very powerful in nature even though his upper half has not formed yet. Tapion goes on to state, "I must stop it." So despite him having to play the flute, we see how Hirudegarn's tail is just destroying the entire city around Tapion and the doctor as they're trying to come up with a means in stopping him, which we see the devastation happen all around Tapion, as all of a sudden we see how the ceiling above him begins to collapse, and we see rubble and dirt and rocks fall upon Tapion, and the doctor is just standing there, he doesn't know what to do, and we see Tapion laying down onto the ground helpless and playing his flute, and then all of a sudden the doctor is sealed away in ice, and we see how he goes on to state, "You're destroying my my lab. You need to be put down. Rise, my ghost warriors. Then all of a sudden we see how his ghost warriors happen to be the Saiyans, as they reply and saying, yes, master. What is your bidding, master? As they all seem to surround the doctor and Hoi having to say, Saiyans, but you've killed them, in which the doctor goes on to state their ghosts are now my slaves, just like you will be too. Take care of him. And then all of a sudden we see how one of them teleports in front of Hoi and saying, it's over. And that's when Hoi looks up and saying, look who's talking. And that's when one of the Saiyans, who ironically looks like Goku, says, what? And then Hirudegarn's tail pierces right through the Saiyan ghost, in which we see how one of the other Saiyans goes on to state, useless fool, get rid of the creature first. And we see how all the Saiyans begin to charge towards Hirudegar's direction, because Hirudegarn right now is the biggest threat that happens to be there presently while under the lab, in which Hirudegarn is going on to destroy the lab even further as the Saiyans begin to attack, as one of them goes on to state, it's just a big stupid animal, eat this. And as they're attacking Hirudegarn, Tapion is starting to move under the rubble, but it looks like the Saiyan attacks on Hirudegarn aren't doing them any justice, or at least so the Saiyans assume, as one of them lands on down and saying that was easy, as the doctor goes on to state, I wouldn't be so sure. And out in the distance we get to see how Hirudegarn is just standing there waiting for them, as one of the other Saiyans goes on to state, dodge you idiot, and that's when the tail cuts the other Saiyan in half. So basically these Saiyans are getting picked apart one by one in the idea that yeah, sure, they might be ghosts, but they're still at a heavy disadvantage considering the fact that Hirudegarn isn't taking any damage from their attacks, in which as the battle continues we see how one of the Saiyans teleports behind Hoi and letting him know you're not going anywhere. And that's when Hoi turns around and saying, what, wait, as the second he turns around we get to see how the Saiyan blasts Hoi into an oblivion and saying master said so, basically rendering him obsolete, until all of a sudden we see how a body comes crashing right through the same Saiyan that ended up killing Hoi, as one of them looks down and mocking his fellow comrade and saying, ha, who's the weakling now? As one of the female Saiyans goes on to state, Raditz, keep your guard up, that creature is very strong, we've already had 3 casualties. As the individual known as Raditz goes on to state, what? No way. And we see Tapion, he's moving underneath the rubble, he's trying his best to get to the flute, and then as he's trying to get to the flute, all of a sudden we see how a pair of boots land before him, in which it's the doctor and saying, how is this monster linked to you, son? As Tapion goes on to state, give me back my ocarina, as the doctor says, answer my question first, with Tapion replying by saying the other half is inside of me, and Hirudegarn is just wreaking havoc outside, and Raditz hears this and saying interesting, as we carry on over into Dragon Ball Multiverse manga chapter number 30, in which Tapion goes on to explain the year is 425 in 16 universes of the Multiverse tournament. This is the story of my quest. It began on Kanats about 1,000 years ago. We were a powerful group of sorcerers. Using a local idol, we gave life to our invincible master Hirudegarn. It worked perfectly. We were about to conquer the entire universe, but the Kanazdians still had artifacts linked to this idol, and they fought back. They were able to cut Hirudegarn in 2 and seal each part into musicians, Tapion and Miyoshina. Even worse, the musicians sealed themselves into boxes and were sent into space. Our group sagged for years and years, over generations. Our quest took hundreds of years. The children of children continued to move from galaxy to galaxy, and we found them. We found them both. It was year 214 in a territory under Prince Cold's domination, and we used our powers to open up one of the boxes, in which the narration goes on to state it worked, but the lower part of Hirudegarn was in it. But the lower part of Hirudegarn in it killed his host, Miyoshina. He went on a rampage that destroyed half of the planet. Eventually, we sealed it again, and as we are about to open up another chest with his host Tapion, Cold's army attacked us. The prince didn't like his planets being destroyed, and I was the only one left alive because they were afraid of killing me would release the monster, so they put me in cryogenic sleep. Forever. But a few hundred years later, someone broke me out of prison and it awoke me. I ran away and began my lonely quest. Years later, I found the other music box, but I understood I would never be able to open it alone. I didn't have enough power. In most universes, I never found a way and died alone and forgotten. In universe 16 and 18, I heard about a magical dragon and went to Earth. there was a battle there and I died. In Universe 3, I heard about the genius Dr. Rachi and it came to him, but I died. In which, as Tapion goes on to explain to the doctor goes on to state, okay, it's clear now, so, and then as we see the doctor point up his hand, he immediately takes action in blowing away Hirudegarn as he goes on to state, first thing to do, seal the legs again. As the doctor's saying, ghosts begin to appear, and the doctor goes on to tell Tapion, as Tapion begins to get back up and saying, give it back, I'll take the whole Hirudegarn in me, and that's when the doctor goes on to say, don't make me laugh, you can barely even keep the other half contained, with Tapion having to reply by saying, but as the doctor goes on to state, I heard you play it once, it's good enough. It's loading the song into the ghosts right now, so the ghosts get to see firsthand as to what the musical notes are as it's being downloaded within them, as the team leader takes the flute as she goes on to state, okay, I received the melody data, leave it to me, Master Rachi, as the Saiyan ghosts begin the onslaught on Hirudegarn, and Hirudegarn in this manga chapter is just wreaking havoc all over the place just with his tail and feet alone, let alone the other part of his body having to be resurrected. We get to see how the Saiyans put up a very tough battle as one of the Saiyans goes on to state, we're the only ones left, so try to stay alive a little more. Distract the legs while I play, and we see how the other two Saiyans are trying to garner Hirudegarn's attention, and Tapion is on the ground, he's witnessing all of this happen, with one of the Saiyans having to state, what a resilient creature, damn it, and that's when Tapion goes on to state, it calls the other part, and that's when Dr. Rachi goes on to state, can you keep it in you, boy? That would really help a lot. As at this given point, we get to see how Tapion's body is beginning to emit some sort of smoke or gas, which indicates that the other half of Hirudegarn is trying to escape his body, as we get to see the Saiyan holding the ocarina is beginning to play the melody, and then that's when we get to see Hirudegarn begin to drop on one of his knees, but he's still attacking the Saiyans with his tail, as one of the Saiyans goes on to state, yes, it's losing control. This thing isn't much, but then as he's talking, Hirudegarn's tail cuts him off. As during the meantime, we get to see how Hirudegarn's tail whizzes on by the Saiyan and striking the leader playing the ocarina. And thus we get to see how the object drops, and that's when the doctor goes on to state, useless Saiyans. Tapion turns around and saying, sorry, but I can't hold it in much longer, not at all. And then all of a sudden, from Tapion's body, the other half of Hirudegarn is beginning to manifest onto the surface. But the only problem is the other half of Hirudegarn's body is not still attached to the lower half, and that's when we see one of the other Saiyans go on to state, don't worry, I got it. He grabs the ocarina as Hirudegarn is trying to kill him, and then we see the upper piece of Hirudegarn begin to form, and that's when Rachi goes on to state, this is bad, I shall call the other ghost warriors, as Raditz comes down with the ocarina and saying, come on, as he whizzes back up and saying that this thing can't fly, what about this? Yes, keep low, little insect, and Raditz believes at this point that since Hirudegarn's body is split and he can't fly, that he has the advantage above him in standing above him and playing the melody. However, at that given point, it looks like as Raditz is beginning to play the melody, somehow, in some way, it's beginning to work, because Tapion looks up, Rachi looks up, and they see how Hirudegarn is beginning to slowly fade away due to Raditz playing the melody, and then out of nowhere, we get to see how finally Hirudegarn is gone, and we see how Tapion goes on to state, it worked. The upper part, it returned inside of me, and Raditz looks down and saying, hey, it's as if I indirectly kissed my own mom, as Raditz comes back down with Rachi having to say, very good, it will get out again and stronger each time, as Tapion goes on to state, with the doctor having to reply by saying, I'm sure we have a few hours, let me go work something out. As the narration later goes on to state, and he did, Dr. Rachi was able to modify the music box into a portable device, and it worked perfectly. Tapion could now walk freely without having to be in constant danger. A few days later, Ghost Raditz disappeared, and Tapion was able to keep all of Hirudegarn within him. As later on we get to see how Dr. Rachi goes on to state, what are you going to do now, son? With Tapion having to reply by saying, well, I really don't know. My little brother was killed maybe centuries ago. Even if I come back onto my planet, it won't be the same. As the doctor goes on to state, I know that feeling. Whatever you do, the dead won't come back. As Tapion says yes, and the narration follows up by saying life continues and years passed. Which we later get to see how the narration goes on to state, time heals the wounds of good-willed people. Tapion traveled far and wide and made many friends, especially Rachi, who Tapion visited often. With time, the musician became much more cheerful, but some will never open open their heart and Rachi would never find peace, because revenge does not stop hatred. One day, new visitors arrive to these two heroes, as we get to see the spaceship land and saying, so, if I win this tournament, I get to resurrect my younger brother? As the tournament holders goes on to state, yes, sure, with Tapion having to reply by saying, amazing, that I would love to participate, as this is basically the recruitment process of having to bring along Tapion, along with bringing along any representative member of said universe to compete in this tournament, as the doctor was also asked to compete, as he replied by saying no thank you, and that's when Tapion goes on to ask why. You're getting way stronger than me, and you can use your ghosts, with the doctor having to reply by saying, I have achieved my goal, I have no wish to dream now. As the tournament holder goes on to state, too bad, as Tapion asks him, so who else is going to be participating, with the tournament holder having to reply by saying, well, I can't say you're among the first, but most likely Kaioshins, Frost Demons, Saiyans. And the minute Rachi heard about Saiyans, that's when all of a sudden we get to see how he actually begs the question, there are actually Saiyans competing. You can write my name down. Many Saiyans are still alive, in which indicates that Rachi still has his revenge to dish out in trying to destroy all Saiyans that he comes across, which of course, we understand that this entire tournament is mainly constructed of mostly Saiyans, as Tapion goes on to state, let's do our best in order to fulfill our wishes, as the good doctor agreed, and we get to see how everyone is on board and taking off, but then all of a sudden we get to see how there is a cloaked figure of Bardock in the shadows of the spaceship, and that's when he goes on to state, we found another planet, with Bardock having to say, no problems, I knew about it already. The arrival to the arena will be delayed just a little bit. As these two manga chapters basically summarize and revolve themselves around the relationship between Dr. Rachi and Tapion and seeing them struggle against Hirudegarn. Now, Hirudegarn basically in this universe is sealed off forever, and with that being said, Tapion can walk freely even with Hirudegarn sealed within him. There is nothing that can influentially get Tapion to break in terms of having the device be broken and Hirudegarn having to be released. So the one thing I didn't understand is why the doctor didn't want to get involved in helping Tapion in this fight against Hirudegarn, because we've never really seen the good doctor actually fight. I mean, it was pretty impressive in seeing what he was able to do technologically wise and in terms of his intelligence having to be off the charts by creating Saiyan ghosts and seeing those Saiyan ghosts actually be his slave. But I do think the one downside to all of this is seeing the inevitable development of Rachi and the idea that he just sat back while Tapion basically did nothing. It was mainly the Saiyan ghost warriors that were basically doing all the hard work, because Tapion had been injured from the get-go. He wasn't able to do anything. So Hirudegarn, on the other hand, I really do wish had more of a combat-like focus to him in these manga chapters, because all we really saw from him was the lower half of his body basically do damage to the entire city, and once the upper half was introduced, it had no substance to it. I mean, there was no relevance in his upper body even having to be there in the first place, because as quickly as his upper body appeared, it was sealed away again. So these manga chapters basically summarize the overall outline of Tapion and his life, and explaining his backstory and explaining where he came from and why he's even competing in this tournament to begin with. And one of the reasons as to why is because he wants to wish back his dead brother and having to reunite with him. So in the end, guys, let me know your thoughts down below as to what you guys thought about these two manga chapters. What is your favorite manga chapter between the two, and what are your overall thoughts on Tapion and of course his new friend Dr. Rachi? Thank you all so much for watching, guys. Once again, if you guys are new to this channel, don't forget to go on ahead and smash that subscribe button, turn on all notifications. If you guys want to watch more Dragon Ball fan mangas, click the description box, guys, check out the previous chapters. Absolutely amazing from start to finish. Thank you all once again. If you guys are Dragon Ball fans, slap a like on the video, and I'll be seeing each and every single one of you guys in the next Dragon Ball discussion. Cue my motherfucking outro, bitch.